You know, the more that I read, the more subgenres that I find to fall in love with. Hey everyone, welcome back to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and today we're discussing some of my favorite subgenres in fantasy. But before we get into that, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it does help us grow. And if you want to help support what I do here, you can check out the description box down below for the link to my Patreon. And that said, guys, if you are a voracious reader, or if you just read a whole lot, you're gonna find some interesting subgenres. And since starting booktube, I have found a lot more, especially since I fell in love with self-pub. And guys, actually, these are all self-pub, and we've got 5 here. Now, we're going to start with, boom, Paranormal Fantasy. This is Phased by Victoria Tekken. I do have a book review for this one, so you can check that out right up there in the cards. But what I fell in love with Supernatural is there's just something refreshing sometimes, is instead of a human going to fight monsters, you have a human or a humanoid who can shape change into something or is part of a supernatural community. What could also fit into this is Fred the Vampire Accountant. But I just absolutely love this kind of different look into fantasy where instead of we're relying on magical powers, we're either struggling with like an internal monster or we're using those gifts to do something spectacular. I absolutely love Paranormal Fantasy, especially when the mood strikes like it did last month, because I just got all up into vampires and werewolves. Next up, of course, we've got Western Fantasy. And arguably one of my favorite in this subgenre is No Land for Heroes by Cal Black. I'm currently reading the sequel, and it is chef's kiss, so good. There's just something fantastic about a fantasy western, about having a 6-shooter, pulling off a train robbery, dealing with basilisks, being an elf, dealing with PTSD, and just dealing with dragons. It's all here. And you like rival gangs out in the Wild West. It's just so good. It just appeals to me. I don't know. Like, growing up, I was never a big person into westerns. I didn't watch western movies. I didn't read western books. And then I picked up a fantasy western, and all of a sudden, I was just swept right off my feet. There is just something special about a fantasy western. And, I mean, Cal Black just knocks it out of the park. We got cozy fantasy. Specifically, we're going to talk about Legends and Lattes. Now, I know you're going to say, but Andrew, that's not self-pub. Well, this edition is. This used to be self-pub. It is now traditionally published. But Legends and Lattes, there is something of merit about slowing down, lowering the stakes, and just living in a fantasy world and running a coffee shop. What Viv has done here and what Travis Baldree has done here is just something absolutely spectacular. This fills a hole in my soul that I didn't know I needed addressing. It was just picking it up. I just slowed down. I relaxed. I started drinking lattes like a madman. Like, I stopped drinking for 3 months after reading this book. I stopped drinking regular coffee and I would only drink lattes. And I don't know why. But, I mean, there's just something fantastic about just not having to constantly have that anxiety in your reading experience. You know, what's going to happen, like, da-da-da-da-da-da. You can just build up a business, do some found family work, and it works. I just absolutely love it. And then we can just address the light fantasy. And essentially, this is something that's kind of like a historical fantasy, if you will. And of course, G.M. White, The Swordsman's Lament, is a fantastic take on this. Basically, it is very light on the fantasy. Like, blink and you'll miss it type of deal. Instead, we kind of get to narrow in on this world, the society, the characters, Belasco, what Belasco's going through, you know, what the wars have done to him, what he's done as a royal champion. There's just something awesome about you just slow down a little bit. And instead of worrying about a magic system, worrying about magic at all, magic is there. But, it's so light within the world that even most people who live in the world don't believe in the magic. And I think that's something great, because then it's kind of going to be used to transition into, say, historical fiction, which is what I did. I basically read something like this, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I do like historical fiction. And you know what? I fell in love with historical fiction, but we're talking about fantasy here, which is why we're not, holding up a historical fiction book. But I love the Royal Champion. I also did Why You Should Read. You can check it up right there. But guys, it's so awesome. I love just kind of discovering something unique and then realizing that there is more books that kind of fit this niche that I can then explore. It's so good. And then we've got quest-based fantasy. Quest-based fantasy, we've got Springtide Harvest by J.D. Mitchell. And basically, if you like D&D, but you want something with a twist where it takes the tropes, turns it on its head, I mean, there's just something great about quest fantasy. Because I started out reading Dragonlance, which is D&D fantasy, back when I was, 10, 11, something like that. And so that was kind of my, fantasy origins a little bit, and then I discovered Wheel of Time and The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and all that. But this is kind of where I started. And now people are starting to take that kind of genre of fantasy and tweak it. And they're starting to do interesting things with it. Again, another Drew Hayes one that does this is the Spells, Swords, and Stealth sub-series, where we get to explore the NPCs and the player characters interacting with each other. It's really, really interesting. There's some great series out there doing fantastic stuff with quest-based fantasy. Here we get to take the kind of quester's journey and flip it on its head. And, because kind of when you play D&D, the quester's like, I've got a bag of gold, and things are obviously going to work out with me if I have the correct equipment. But what if you're just silly and fooling yourself? And I just love that, because we can kind of do analysis on these characters where you typically wouldn't expect it. So these subgenres are fantastic. They're great to explore. They're fun reads. And they're just so rewarding because there's something a little different. Let me know in the comments down below what some of your favorite subgenres are. And that's all I've really got for you today, guys. So till next time, peace out. Stay magical. Bye. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons.